The paddle starts out at $189. With code PBWilly, you get 10% off, so it ends up being about $170. And I will be very closely comparing this to something like the Boomstick, because this is actually very close in terms of feel and sound to the Boomstick. It actually has that very boomy effect, which is why I will be comparing this to a Boomstick. It's very, very nice. I will say the very first thing I noticed about it when I hit with it is that it is freaking loud. So that is definitely one of the things you'll notice right when you hit. So for the feel, it actually has okay touch for the amount of poppiness this offers. So this is, like I said, very similar in terms to a Boomstick where balls do seem to pop off very quickly, but it does feel more manageable than a Boomstick. It could be because the added weight on the Boomstick makes it a little bit too poppy, but I do feel like the Aireo is definitely a touch better in terms of feel. I do think that if the Boomstick had no MOI, this would be very similar. Of course, you're gonna be saving about half the cost of a Boomstick by buying one of these. So let's get into a little bit of the gameplay with this paddle. Let's go into the touch and control parts of this paddle. So in terms of forgiveness, off-center hits are somewhat forgiving, but compared to something like the Gator Strike, it's definitely not as forgiving. But if you compare it to the Boomstick, I would say it is more forgiving. In terms of effort to create power, this paddle is definitely one of the easier paddles to use to create power, just like the Boomstick. I will say that this paddle is actually very exceptional at the net. Some of the putaways that I was getting with this paddle felt absolutely insane. They looked really fast, and I think this is one of the few paddles where if I had hit a putaway and body bagged someone, it would actually hurt. I didn't actually end up adding any weight to this, but I feel like this paddle would in fact play very well with added weight. Now, in terms of pop, this is where this paddle is very reminiscent to a Boomstick. You're gonna hear how loud it is just by hitting it, and you're gonna feel a very familiar like jump off the paddle force, just like the Selkirk Boomstick. It does come off the paddle with just about the same amount of speed and deflection.